Hello and welcome. My name is Meepolis, they, she, he, and this is Literally Graphic. And today we are looking at my second Joe Sacco title, namely his most recent book, Paying the Land, published by Metropolitan Books in 2020. As I've already mentioned a few times, this is a book written by an outsider profiling the Dene in the Mackenzie River Valley, highlighting the strengths and some of the struggles particular to this community. Obviously, I do try and regularly review graphic novels by Indigenous creators, with a lot of content leaning towards Indigenous creators of so-called North America, as that is what I have most easy access to. Some of the topics covered in those books, and this book do have some overlap, but looking back over my past reading, I don't think I've read or reviewed anything by a Dene author in particular, which I should certainly correct. So before digging into the review of this book, I wanted to highlight some books I've added to my TBR by Dene authors. First, we have From Bear Rock Mountain, The Life and Times of a Dene Residential School Survivor by Antoine Mountain, and second we have author and law student Catherine Laferty's memoir entitled Northern Wildflower. If any of y'all have recommendations, please do leave them in the comment section. Content notes in this book for genocide, extraction industries, colonization, Christian supremacy and abuse, hunting, alcoholism, child abuse of all kinds, death, and trauma. As is my style, if you want to learn more about Joe Sacco, check out my initial review of Footnotes in Gaza. TLDR, he's a fairly celebrated comics journalist who covers military conflict. Also, we learn in this book, Sacco is a bit of an outdoor enthusiast. Apparently, this book started its life as Sacco being hired to create 2 comics articles about fracking and climate change. Keywords that came to mind reading this book were nonfiction, information-dense, colonization, industry boom and bust, generations, healing, asserting culture, and resilience. The Goodreads description is, quote, "The Dene have lived in the vast Mackenzie River Valley since time immemorial by their account. To the Dene, the land owns them, and it is central to their livelihood and very way of being. But the subarctic Canadian Northwest Territories are home to valuable resources, including oil, gas, and diamonds. With mining came jobs and investment, but also road building, pipelines, and toxic waste, which scarred the landscape, and alcohol, drugs, and debt, which deformed a way of life. In Paying the Land, Joe Sacco travels the frozen north to reveal a people in conflict over the costs and benefits of development. Sacco recounts the shattering impact of a residential school system that aimed to remove the Indian from the child, the destructive process that drove the Dene from the bush into settlements and turned them into wage laborers, the government land claims stacked against the Dene Nation, and their uphill effort to revive a wounded culture." End quote. Covering extractive industries. Journalism is itself an extractive industry. This was touched on, but I feel like that tension remains, for me at least. Even in trying to explore other people's opinions about this book, it got a bit meh with all the praise being slathered on Sacco for his work. Obviously, he's very talented, and he seems to be fairly humble in the way he portrays himself in the 2 books I've read, although I should probably track down some general interviews with the guy to get a better feel for his public persona. I have no final word on this, but I feel like there must be a better way to talk about people talking about other people. Moving along, the art is very detailed and naturalistic. I'm not always the biggest fan of super detailed graphic novels, although I do think Sacco's emphasis on faces that are still somewhat sparingly detailed compared to his landscapes, things do remain pretty balanced. Sacco's choices around page layout continue to become more intricate and expressive. Obviously, race, at least how this social construct exists in so-called North America, is central to Paying for the Land. In my exploration of people's opinions of this book, I didn't run into much critique of Sacco's choices, but I'm certainly not a judge who arbitrates what is good representation of Dene and what is bad representation of Dene. He does present both sides of the story, that of colonialist violence that created suffering, and the positives of Dene culture historically and present. Sacco also presents a diversity of opinions across this segment of the Dene community, rather than painting them as a monolith. Gender and sexuality is perhaps the best category to talk about the one criticism that I did find of the book. Over on Goodreads, if you click through to 1-star reviews, there is one written review from one CJ. Firstly, they assert that this book was written for a non-native audience, which I also agree with. They go on to highlight the way that 3 pages are spent trying to humanize the nuns who worked in residential schools as compared to 2 about the victimization of the children. To paraphrase, I was also caught a bit off guard by this section of the book that seemed to imply that nuns sexually assaulted students because they were placed in convents by their parents and were young, overwhelmed, and sexually frustrated. To be clear, that is not exactly what the book says, but based on the larger context and some of the words used, I feel like that is what it is saying in so many words. I should note that as someone who leans abolitionist, among other things, I do think there is space to talk about the hurt that happened to people who then go on to hurt others. That said, I'm not sure why the statements from Mary Wilson, which these pages are centered around, was necessarily relevant to the book at all. Even as a Christian myself, the culture of the Catholic Church, along with many other Christian denominations, has inflicted a lot of harm on many people inside and outside of the church. Maybe talk about the ways nuns were mistreated is for another book. I feel there is probably a way that this could have been included that did not come across so badly. Money, employment on reserve, housing, and welfare were all talked about pretty extensively throughout the book. In particular, Sacco does make a point to highlight the difference between his previous interview practice and how things worked for him putting this project together, namely compensating people for their time and knowledge. And while Sacco doesn't frame it as such, and it's not very integrated beyond maybe trauma, disability of different kinds did seem to be an undercurrent to the narrative. To conclude, this book does some good things and it does at least one not very good thing. A lot of skill and time went into it, and I do appreciate that Sacco depicts himself continuing to learn about how to do this thing called comics journalism. As usual, I am suspicious of my own feelings in the face of general popularity. I think I am going to go with a tentative 3-star, as that is the general rating for things I feel conflicted about. Might go back and lower it to 2 stars, as that is the official OK rating. What do you think? Bye, y'all. Keep reading and organize to end capitalist oppression. And as always, Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, non-Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.